Stephanie Jenkins is still fired up after this past weekend. And here's why. In the court of public opinion, the way she's been handling the Deshawn situation is starting to resemble those wicked stepmothers you see in classic movies. Overbearing, controlling, always inserting themselves into the spotlight, and desperate to own the narrative no matter what the truth is. This wasn't just a regular weekend for Deshawn. This was a reunion, an adventure, a rare and precious break from his usual life. He spent time with his mom, Desiree, and his siblings, and by all accounts, it was pure joy from start to finish. Witnesses said his grin barely left his face. He laughed freely, played without hesitation, and soaked in moments he'd never had before. His very first amusement park trip, finally meeting his grandma and aunt, reconnecting with his big brother and cousins, and having a bedroom all to himself. Something so simple, yet such a huge step up from the cramped one-room hotel he shares with 6 other people back home. But here's a twist. Stephanie is painting a completely different picture. Instead of celebrating his joy, she is pushing a story that flips the truth on its head. She keeps making it a point to say both online and in conversations that Deshawn didn't enjoy his time at his mother's place. People who were actually there know it's a lie. They saw his excitement. They saw him bond with family he had been kept from for years. Yet Stephanie insists on spreading the opposite version. And it's not just casual storytelling. It feels deliberate, like she's going out of her way to rewrite the weekend to fit her preferred image. Stephanie has now gone beyond what most would call normal pettiness, and that's where we need to dig into exactly what she's saying. Stephanie is now telling her friends and anyone who asks about Deshawn's visit a version of events that suggests Deshawn loves her and her kids more than his own mother and biological family. She is framing it as if the bond he has with them outweighs the joy he experienced over the weekend. For instance, one person sent her a perfectly friendly text via TikTok, the thread. "Hey girl, hope Deshawn had a great time at his mama's house." This wasn't a trap or an attack. This person wasn't fishing for gossip, nor were they asking Stephanie to bash Desiree or diminish her role as a mother. It was simply a warm, human check-in. I hope that Deshawn had a thoughtful, balanced answer could have been. Yes, he did, although he is also happy to be with us. That short sentence would have recognized that he enjoyed his weekend and still loves the family he lives with. A win-win, no drama needed. But instead, Stephanie chose to send a response dripping with defensiveness. He didn't. He couldn't wait to be back home with me and his siblings. So I hope you have the day you deserve. In just a few words, she managed to deny the fun he had, center herself as the focus of his attention, and even slip in a passive-aggressive closing jab that left a bitter aftertaste.
According to Stephanie, Deshawn did not have a good time with his mother, and that he could not wait to come back to the motel with his siblings and Stephanie. Now, I'm not going to say that Stephanie and Deshawn don't have a relationship with each other, but at the same time, why are you trying to make it seem like you want this little boy to be miserable? Why are you trying to convince the internet that Deshawn does not want anything to do with his mom? And this is why I will not stop talking about this. Y'all can be mad at me all you want. I'm not the one pretending a child is mine on this internet, and I'm most definitely not married to a PDF file. Now, this message was sent to me. You can just tell that Stephanie hates this time that Deshawn gets with his mom. Y'all have to understand that the whole reason why Desiree does not have Deshawn is because of Stephanie. Also, if you guys do not want to see these types of videos and want me to stop talking about the resilient Jenkins, then y'all need to comment on things that you do want me to post.
It wasn't simply an offhand remark. It was a pointed narrative choice, one that cast his entire weekend in a shadow. This framing stood in dark contrast to the reality of what happened. Over that weekend, Deshawn experienced a cascade of firsts that any child would remember for years. His first ever amusement park trip, the wide-eyed thrill of new rides and games, meeting his granny and auntie, Drew's mother and sister, for the first time in memory, connecting with his big brother, Alita's son, and Drew, and playing freely with cousins he'd barely known before. He was embraced by relatives who laughed with him, held him close, and treated him like he'd always been part of their daily lives. Witnesses described him as particularly glowing, his energy bubbling over as he darted around, shouting in excitement, wrapping relatives in hugs, and grinning so widely it looked like it might hurt. For a child who had spent years in a quiet, restricted environment, these moments were more than just fun. They were a test of belonging. And really, why wouldn't he be radiant? After years of isolation, living with Stephanie and Drew, cut off from extended family and confined to a cramped one-room space where privacy was non-existent, Deshawn suddenly found himself in a warm, bustling household where he could just be a kid, laughing loud, exploring freely, falling asleep in a room that was his alone. Wouldn't any child want to linger a little longer in that kind of love and chaos? That's why Stephanie's version rings false to many. It doesn't just bend the truth. It seems to erase the joy everyone else clearly saw, replacing it with a story that fits her own image. Look at this particular weekend in isolation. The contrast is stark. Deshawn left the tight, crowded motel space and stepped into a home environment where he had privacy, room to breathe, and the energy of a larger family around him. That alone is enough to make most children light up. And it was clear from smiling photos, relatives' excited accounts, and the obvious difference in setting that he thrived in. When Stephanie insists that he didn't enjoy it, her claim doesn't line up with any of that evidence. It reads less like a neutral report of his feelings and more like a calculated effort to shape how others perceive the situation in her favor. This matters because when an adult in a caregiving role manipulates a child's story to fit their own image, it raises red flags, not just socially, but potentially for agencies like CPS. If a pattern emerges of dismissing or rewriting a child's positive experiences with another safe parent, it can be viewed as emotional manipulation or alienation, which could trigger closer scrutiny. Law enforcement may not intervene on words alone, but in the broader context of custody or visitation disputes, these kinds of statements can become part of an evidentiary trail. By downplaying his enjoyment, she positions herself and her household as the only place he truly belongs, sidestepping the fact that she isn't his legal stepmother and is speaking from the role of his father's partner. That framing could, over time, harm Deshawn's relationship with his mother and extended family, and in severe cases, professionals might classify such behavior as potentially damaging to a child's emotional development. In other words, if repeated, this isn't just petty drama. It could have lasting consequences for Deshawn's well-being and for the adults involved if outside agencies decide to step in. Stephanie's social media and poverty rant. On Facebook, Stephanie complained about still not having housing. A commenter pressed her. "Girl, poverty is a choice for you. You're making thousands on TikTok. As someone in the creator program, I know how well it pays. Where does all the money you make on TikTok go?" This single comment lit a fuse. Stephanie, who rarely responds to her critics publicly, fired back with a spiral rant that gave away more than she probably intended. You claim you know how it works. Maybe your videos that generate up to 1 mil views actually generate money. For me, I get the views from the profile visits, which isn't where the pay is. For example, I had one video at 700k views and I made $35. My videos don't generally make as much money as everyone likes to claim. I truly don't owe an explanation to what's in my pocket or why my timing isn't on my side with the housing. None of that makes me an awful person. Quite frankly, it's messed up for people to keep pushing the narrative that because we are still homeless, we are trash. How many times I gotta say Drew reached a crash out period and we financially fell pretty hard. And no, I couldn't have just picked up the slack at the time. I was at home maintaining the kids. I have never made the money everyone claims I'm making. I really freaking wish that I was swimming in it like y'all claim. But you straight up assuming you know what's going on my apps? Unless you're stalking and watching my phone, there isn't a way for you to. So you're just wrong if you claim to do. I don't care if you think I sound slow. There is just certain things you don't do, and claiming you know someone else's bank account status is one of them. She followed up almost immediately. And since I know you're small minded, we'll flip this and be like, okay, well, if you're not making the money, then why keep doing it? I am making more than I would make working. I never said I wasn't. But the whole she's made 80 grand plus is a bunch of BS. It's what others say to rabbit out the topic, and yet you'll buy right into the BS. I said I'd start being more responsive in comments, but a part of me thinks y'all aren't ready for that. Her defensiveness here mirrors the attitude Drew had before the child support intervened. A belief that gig work or content creation was enough, coupled with resistance to traditional employment. Drew famously told people he made more in 4 hours than in a standard 8 hour shift, and that he wouldn't take jobs with bosses and customers who could frustrate him. He only accepted his Safeway position when a judge made it clear that door dashing wouldn't count for child support. When you zoom out, the parallels become more than just surface similarities. Both Stephanie and Drew made a choice to expand their families even while facing significant financial instability, and both have consistently bristled, sometimes aggressively, when anyone questions whether they are making deliberate efforts to change that situation. Critics point out that this reveals an element of urgency. The resources and opportunities to pivot may not be perfect, but they do exist, and yet both of them seem to actively reject them in favor of maintaining their current lifestyle. That choice, intentional or not, paints a very different picture than the one they present online. Stephanie responded to this kind of criticism not by engaging with the substance, but by shifting the focus outward. And also, that whole poverty is a choice. You some kind of ignorant if you don't know that poverty is the fault of our god government. You calling out the poor as the problem is a brainwashed mentality. While systematically, issues undeniably affect poverty rates, this statement steps aside the specific and personal accountability being questioned here. In practical terms, agencies like CPS, social workers, or even family court evaluators often assess whether a parent or guardian is taking responsible steps to providing stability, repeatedly rejecting available avenues for steady income while continuing to make choices that increase financial strain can be interpreted as willful neglect of those responsibilities. This doesn't mean the police would swoop in over a Facebook rant or in ongoing custody or housing aid reviews. Such patterns can become part of the official record.
So, Stephanie, if you only made $35 off of a video that only got 700,000 views, then what are you planning to donate from your little Gaza video? Because that video only got 526.7K thousand views. And the majority of all your views are searched views. We know that. Like, we've been known that. Yes, some people are throwing some wild, crazy numbers out there, but we do know that you make enough that you can't get food stamps, or at least maybe that's what you want us to believe. Who really knows? We don't believe anything that you say. This was the comment that she was responding to on Facebook. By the way, pause to read. And she is calling all of us ignorant because we are pointing out that they chose this situation because they did. They didn't lose their jobs because they got laid off. They either quit or was fired. It was Drew's own words. I don't like being told what to do. I'll just turn around and walk out. People be having attitudes. The only ignorant thing here, Stephanie, is you and Drew, because maybe it's not a good idea that you respond to comments because you just go back and forth. Like, I've got severe whiplash, like we all do. Plus, isn't it the only reason why Drew ended up going to Safeway to get a job was because in child support court with Arlita, his first baby mom, didn't they like tell him that DoorDash wasn't going to cut it, that he had to go and get a W-2, which is what you guys like to call it? It is not the government's fault that you and Drew chose to not work with no savings, no emergency fund, and continue to have babies. That's not the government's fault. That's your fault. You and Drew, y'all's fault. Are things expensive out here? Yes, but that's why you work. So then you can afford the things, or at least afford the necessities in order to live. And y'all can't even provide that without assistance. And I came across a video earlier that points out that you might be lying about not using food stamps. And there's nothing wrong with food stamps, really, it's not. But in my personal opinion, food stamps, government assistance, it's meant for people that need it that can't work and people who fall on hard times, right? But it's not meant for people who are able to work and able to take care of themselves to live off of for the rest of their life. It's supposed to help you get back on your feet. But y'all are just sitting there mooching this entire time. And we've been trying to tell you how to do better. But you don't want to listen.
That's why many observers interpret Stephanie's answer not just as defensiveness, but as avoidance. An unwillingness to confront the gap between her public narrative and the choices she controls every single day. When critiques become the target, creator Slay with Alicia has been vocal in calling out Stephanie for refusing to divorce Jeremiah Thompson, a registered SO, even after knowing his crimes. Alicia pointed out that Stephanie only left when CPS threatened to take her kids and still hasn't divorced him. But when Alicia launched a GoFundMe after her husband's heart attack to cover bills because he was the main breadwinner, people dug into her past and found her husband also has SO charges. Alicia defended him, saying it was a one-time past event, but online sleuths found more than one report. She argued that it was behind them, but critics asked, if that history is enough to condemn Stephanie, why isn't it enough to hold Alicia accountable too? This mirrors what happened to creator Morgan, another critic, or the Jenkins. Speaking out against them, and defenders will dig up that, and often what they find is true, though not always relevant. So the question remains, do these revelations cancel out the valid criticism, or just add another messy layer to an already messy story? Recap before we wrap up. We've looked at Stephanie's questionable narrative about Deshawn's weekend, her defensive and revealing response to accusations about her income, and the way criticism of her often boomerangs back onto the critics themselves. Taken together, these aren't isolated incidents. They form a larger picture of how she manages conflict, criticism, and public perception. Each section reveals a recurring pattern of control, denial, and deflection, layered over a situation that involves a child's emotional well-being, ongoing financial instability, and the volatile nature of social media disputes. This isn't just about one weekend or one Facebook post. It's about how these repeated choices could shape relationships, public trust, and even the attention of authorities if the pattern continues. Stephanie is still holding tight to control over the Deshawn narrative, doubling down on her defense of how she handles her money, and now watching as some of her most vocal critiques are dragged into their own storms of public exposure. The cycle shows no sign of slowing. If anything, it's gaining momentum. And honestly, with each new layer peeling back to reveal another clash, another contradiction, or another twist in the plot, it's hard to imagine these stories settling quietly anytime soon. At the end of the day, the question becomes bigger than one weekend or one Facebook thread. Are we witnessing a genuine, messy personal struggle with all its flaws laid bare, or are we seeing a deliberately managed performance where every statement and reaction is designed to reinforce control over the image she projects? The fact that every critique ends up under the same harsh spotlight raises another question. How long until the next unexpected turn hits? Because if there is one thing this ongoing saga has made clear, it's that the story doesn't end when the post goes quiet. It just awaits for the next chapter to erupt.